So, how's it going?
Technology problems.
Oh my gosh, technology. I've had so many. It's been like a technology fail 24 hours for me.
Oh,
lights,
so frustrating.
These studio lights weren't going, they were going on and off. The camera was on the fritz. I'm calling Sony. I mean, it's
so there's gremlins and everything.
One thing after another. It's just insane.
It's Murphy's Law. This is what I get working with somebody whose nickname is Murphy.
Exactly, right.
I should have known.
You deserve it.
Constant.
Right. Yeah. Hey, some people have been asking us about the mouse story back when we did the podcast number 3.
Oh my gosh.
About the Roth IRAs. We kind of left them hanging. Like, we had this mouse and they threw it out and,
Inquiring minds want to know.
Yeah, right. They want to know.
Well, okay, everyone. So if you didn't hear the story, go back and listen to episode 3 about Roth plan basics. We had some excitement right before we got on the show. I am very sad to report that Nikki is deceased. We set a trap before we came to do the show, and when we got back, he was in there. And so no more mice in my office. All has been well since then. And we laugh, but it is sad that,
we'll do catch and release next time, right?
Yes, I mean, he was in the can. I could have it's a funny story. Go listen to it because I definitely could have easily walked him outside.
Yeah.
And I chose to act insane instead.
You did the girl thing. So let's call it a spade here.
It's true.
Yeah.
Sorry, ladies.
For sure.
It's true.
Right.
We do it.
So, good. That story's wrapped up. For
what are we talking about today?
Inflation.
Inflation.
Super
exciting topic.
That's right.
Well, let me tell you a story.
Okay.
So there's this old lady. She's selling pretzels on the street in New York City for 25 cents a pretzel. And every day a young man passes by and drops a quarter in her cup, but he doesn't take a pretzel. This goes on for 3 years. Finally, one day, the man walks by, he drops a quarter in the cup, and the woman finally speaks to him, and she says, "It's 35 cents now." Stupid inflation joke.
Inflation. Well, I have one too.
Okay, let's hear
Not
yours.
to be outdone. So did you know that Apple is the most futuristic company out there?
Why is that?
They are so futuristic that they've already raised their prices to what they're going to be 50 years from now. They backed in inflation. Yep, there you go.
All right, you win. That's way better than mine.
All right, okay. So,
jokes aside, inflation, I think, is on everybody's mind right now. At least it is if you watch the news. Our clients are asking us a lot of questions about it. And so we're going to...
welcome to a live version of A Place of Possibility.
I am Angela Wright.
And I'm Richard Del Monte. And we're really happy to have you here to our inaugural version. It's our maiden voyage,
Our maiden live voyage.
Yep.
Here we go.
That's great.
For better or worse.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So we're happy to have you here.
Yeah. So our goal is not to turn you into, armchair economists, inflation experts. We just want to teach you what it is that you need to know, sift through some of the garbage that's out there right now, and maybe have a few good lines to drop at your next cocktail party.
Yeah.
Make you look smarter.
Yeah. That's a good goal.
Yeah.
So why don't we define what inflation is
Define
first
it.
so people know.
Yeah,
so
what
really,
is
if you have to pay more for the very same thing now that you did buy or could have bought a year ago for less, that's inflation, right?
Yeah.
And conversely, deflation would be where you can buy something that's exactly the same as you could have bought before, but you pay less now.
Yep.
There you go, right?
Yeah.
That's in a nutshell.
Yeah.
We all understand that.
Yeah. So like in the 1940s, a loaf of bread was 15 cents.
Yeah, that's pretty wild, isn't it?
It is. I mean, that's hard for people to relate to.
Yeah. Not too many people are alive, today that were alive in the 40s. But, for people my age, it's a good opportunity
of advanced age.
Yeah, okay, right. Yeah. I remember very clearly in the 60s, growing up, riding my Stingray bicycle, and we could go buy a candy bar for a dime, or a nickel. We'd go get those bottles, the Coke bottle stuff that people throw in the fields, and we get 3 cents. 2 Coke bottles would get us a candy bar. And so a Coke was like a dime.
Yeah.
And a loaf of bread was a quarter, and the same price existed for a gallon of gas.
That's still true.
They're both a quarter. What do you mean?
A gallon of gas and a loaf of bread.
They're both around $4, right? That's true, right?
Unless you're gluten free. I just paid $9 for a loaf.
Oh my gosh,
that's extortion.
that's insane.
It's all rice too. Why is it even that expensive?
There's a supply and demand thing right there. Too many people want it. There's not enough of it, so the price goes up.
Or I'm an idiot.
Right. There you
One
go.
of the two.
No, it's not that. It's not that. You're definitely not an idiot. Okay, so and also, what about houses?
Oh
my
yeah.
gosh, people.
Oh yeah.
My parents bought their first house. I think in the early 50s for like $4,000.
My parents, I think in the 80s, 120,000 in the Bay Area.
Yeah. Well, not my first house, the second house, I bought it in San Ramon. It was $235, and I thought, $250,000, I'm going to go bankrupt. And I just looked on Zillow last night, and it's $1.25 million.
You still look that house up.
I do, because I sold it, and it's the worst thing I ever did. It's $1.25 million now.
Oh my gosh, you're
the
kidding.
same house from we bought it in 1992, so 30 years. That's inflation, right? That's a good example of inflation.
Yeah.
What about deflation examples?
So that exists too. Clothing, for example. I can walk into H&M today and buy a t-shirt for $3. Back when I was a child in the 80s, even the discount department stores, you couldn't get a t-shirt for $3. Why is that? Shouldn't it cost more today if this whole inflation thing is real?
Yeah, you would think. But what happened is that because companies learned that they can ship jobs and manufacturing overseas to cheaper places like Vietnam. That's one of the ones. You always get clothes say made in Vietnam,
totally.
In Thailand, these other places. That's how you can do it cheaper. So because the labor and the cost of manufacturing are lower, that translates to lower prices. So we have our workers, that were working in the textile industry in the United States decimated, but we all buy cheaper prices at Target and cheaper clothes at Target and these other places, H&M and all that.
Bad for workers, great for consumers.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. So we've established inflation goes up and it goes down. It goes both ways.
It goes both ways.
Like some friends we know.
Woo! Bada boom!
Just kidding.
I like that.
Okay, so how do we track this thing? Like, we get these numbers all the time. What are they actually tracking? Is it the price of milk or?
There are indices that the government tracks. They have to do something with the money that we pay them. And so they track things like producer prices and real estate prices and healthcare costs and things like that. But the one that we mostly know about is this Consumer Price Index, or CPI. And that actually started in 1967 when inflation was kind of picking up. People go, we should have an index to track this. And so it started out at 100, and tell us where it is right now.
800.
800. So that means the prices have gone up 8 times since 1967.
Yeah.
That's a real
see that in all these
bracer, to think about that, right?
It hurts.
Yeah. So you think about people that are retired, like maybe if you want to live a long time and you retired in like the 60s or 70s, how much do you have to be able to buy the same things now? You could be decimated.
I love the story you always tell about your dad when he first retired.
Yeah.
A car was equal to his monthly pension payment, and now, of course, a car is 6 times his monthly pension payment.
Yeah. So you have to. That's a different story, but you need to factor inflation into your thinking when you're going to retire for sure, because it's going to be there.
It varies wildly, right? Like through the years.
Oh yeah.
It's been way up. It's been way down. There's been some averages. Let's walk through some of these numbers so you can get an idea of where we actually stand today versus.
Okay, good. Yeah. So the high point, the highest inflation we had in the United States was in 1946, and it was 18.1% in 1 year.
Ouch.
Now that was why was that happening? Because everybody was coming back from the war. Everybody wanted to buy cars and all kinds of appliances and things and spend money, and there wasn't enough of it being made, so prices went up. I mean, it makes sense, right? Supply and demand.
Yep.
Now the low point was in 1914, and it was minus 15.8%. That would be deflation, big time deflation. Now in the more modern era, the highest inflation we've had in my lifetime, is that the modern era or maybe not? Right?
I think you might span both. Yeah. Just kidding.
13.3%. 1979 was the high water mark.
Yeah. And the next few years were really rough.
They were really bad. Yeah. We'll talk about that in a minute. Yeah. For sure. Yeah.
Okay, so on average.
3.25%.
3.25%.
Yeah. Going back to 1914, last 100 years plus, about 3.25%, including all the highs and lows.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure. So
then between 1978 and 1981, we see 50% the total cost of living increase, right? Like you were around during that time. A 50% increase. Like, a 50% increase in your cost of living, that's
in 3 or 4 years.
Huge.
Yeah.
What was that like? So like I wasn't, I was a child during that time.
We should have the music like the violins playing, or the little harp. Back in the day, when everything was
what was life like? So because I think people are a little wigged out right now, right? Yeah. Because especially me, I don't know what to expect in a time of high inflation. What does that mean for me? So you were there. What was it like?
Yeah. I mean, in the sepia picture I'm going to paint for you, it was...
We had color photography, didn't we?
No, we lived in black and white. Everything was black and white. It was, the cost of living, like mortgages were 16%, money market rates at the bank. Like I remember, Bank of America having a sign, 20% money market rates. It was like normal. I was like, okay, that's what it was. I didn't really know. It was early 20s. I didn't know any different.
Yeah.
And what really happened a lot was people were getting cost of living raises all the time because.
Oh, really?
Well, if you had a job, I had a union job at the time, and I worked in a steel mill, and we were getting raises every 5 minutes because inflation was so rampant that we had to keep getting raises. Yeah.
Did you feel as though your earnings kept up with it?
I don't know about that, but I felt like we were getting raises, and I didn't have to spend money on it. I was a kid,
True, yeah.
It wasn't much I was doing with it. So
you weren't starving.
I wasn't starving. Nobody was starving.
Yeah.
It was fine. It was comfortable. You adjust. You adjust to anything.
Yeah.
And it didn't feel horrible.
I see.
But the government didn't like it. I mean, we were trying to do it because it makes the cost of everything go up and makes people have less confidence in the future.
Of course.
So that's the thing about it. Okay. You really want to have stable prices.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. So we've captured some questions from clients.
Yeah.
The big four that they want to know, and we're also going to have time. So if you want to enter questions in for us at the end, we're going to have time for that. So please type those in, and we'll get as many as we can. So the first question is they want to know is what causes inflation? Mm-hmm. What is hyperinflation?
Yeah.
And how much do we have to worry about that? Because we hear about that in the press.
That's all I hear about in the news.
Right. Why has inflation been so low in recent years? And interestingly, it's been low. It's been like 2.35 for the last 40 years. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And why is the media banging the drum for hyperinflation?
Ad space.
Ad space?
Sorry.
Yeah.
Did I say that? Sorry.
Yep.
We will talk more about.
And how worried should we be?
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
So what causes inflation?
Yeah. So at its simplest level, inflation is a function of supply and demand. The more people want an item, let's say an apple, for example, the more they're willing to pay for that apple, right? You want the apple and I want the apple, and our friend has an apple, and I'm going to say, well, I'll give you $2 more for that apple. I don't want Richard having it. And he's going to say, well, I'll give you $4 more. So on and so forth. This happens all across our economy everywhere, and prices rise over time. Right.
That's right. And you see that right now, especially in California. I don't know about other states. But I know it's happening in Texas too.
Yeah.
With housing, right? You want to buy a house right now, you're probably going to have to offer a couple $100,000 more for it.
And it had better be cash.
And it better be cash, and you better close in a week, right?
We're not contingencies.
We're not messing with you. Yeah.
Yeah, that's supply and demand in housing right now.
And that's where you see inflation, though. That's one of the things that's driving it.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Everybody wants it. It's in limited supply.
We're also seeing this with microchips right now. Yep. So shortage in manufacturing due to plants being closed down thanks to the pandemic. Shipping issues also happening. And so microchips are interesting. This is, I think, the first time we've had a shortage of microchips, and they're in everything. Did you know there's like 100 of them in your car?
That's amazing.
Yeah, so car manufacturing is slowing down. Obviously, cell phones, they're in your refrigerator, your washing machine. Like a lot of prices are going to rise because there just isn't enough supply thanks to this shortage of microchips.
Right.
Inflation.
Right. So then you have these prices going up. Mm-hmm. That's basically how inflation works. Right. Yeah. So things get a little more complicated when the government gets involved, right? Yeah, right? What a surprise, right? So, and it does something to what the government tries to do to be able to manage inflation or to solve problems like the COVID crisis, is they will either inject more money into the system, which would have more money that people can spend, or they take it back when they want to slow things down. So they basically are managing to a very narrow band of inflation, right? Like 2% is what their target is.
2% is the Fed target.
Right, that's what they're trying to get.
We're not trying to get to zero. That's never the goal here. Some inflation means healthy growth in your economy. It's a good thing. Right.
You need to have growth. Deflation is a bad thing.
Yeah.
It's really, that's when Japan has deflation. Some of these other countries have deflation, and it becomes a vicious cycle that's really bad. You want to have a virtuous cycle of a little bit of inflation. Yeah. People still feel like everything's relatively stable, but it's getting a little more expensive as time goes on.
Yeah.
So the government's doing that behind the scenes, but they can make things a little messy in terms of inflation. So recently they did all the stimulus,
so we've
right?
had all this stimulus. We've had 2 payments. We've had additional unemployment. We've had PPP loans. Getting access to cash is a lot easier now.
Right. And it's still paying. I mean, people are still, riding on the coattails of $600 a week extra, or I got more unemployment. I don't need to go to work. Yeah. Right. So it's causing those kinds of problems. A lack of workers equates to higher wages. They're paying people that fast food places $15 an hour to go to work there now.
Yeah.
Which is incredible, right?
We're hiring, and I see that here.
Yeah.
Wages, it's 10 grand more than it was last year.
Is it?
Okay.
Darn it.
Sorry.
Okay. I didn't want to
Also,
hear
we're
that.
hiring.
Yeah. No, it's good. We like to pay. It's okay.
Yeah. So this is what's happening right now, where we've got the government injecting all of this money into the economy, and so naturally people are worried. They're going, yikes!
Right.
Everybody has all this money. We're already seeing us clamoring for goods,
Right.
and yikes, are we headed towards some sort of inflation problem?
Right. I think what we have to do is distinguish situational inflation from systemic inflation, right?
Yes.
And
absolutely.
so really you want to look at what's really happening. I mean, we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, but what's really happening because of COVID?
Yeah.
So like the lumber prices, right? Did we talk about lumber already?
Yeah, so lumber prices this is really interesting. You have this convergence of things going on. You still have the manufacturing issues because you can't get people into the plants to manufacture.
Right.
You can't
Right.
get the distribution. There's not enough truck drivers. Also the unemployment. People don't want to work. There's a lot of factors coming into this issue with lumber,
Right.
but you can't buy lumber here in California, or you can, but you're going to pay a pretty penny for it.
Yeah, and it was even worse like up until like June.
Yeah, and so what happens in
Super
June? So
expensive.
this is why we're not completely in a panic right now, because what happens when it goes up, 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 up?
People go, I don't really want it that bad.
Yeah.
So that less people buy it.
This
Right.
happened to me with lumber. I wanted to do some remodeling in my home, and we got all these contractors coming in. First of all, their rates are through the roof because
they are.
can't. So it's because they're in high
We
demand.
got plenty of work.
And then the lumber, steel, also very expensive. And so you know what we said? I can wait a year.
Yeah.
I'll just
Right.
wait this out. And so that happens on a massive scale, and then things equalize.
Right.
And then the lumber companies also saw that there was this massive run on lumber. They ramped up their production. That
Yeah,
takes
we
a
wanna make
couple of
more money.
months to equalize, but
Yeah.
eventually you get there.
Yep. And we had the same thing with gasoline in the summer. We were actually, our newsletter, we were thinking there might be some gas shortages
Yeah.
in the summer because it was like everybody is getting turned loose. We thought at the time COVID was over and we're all going to be out there with no masks and driving around and, for the first time and going everywhere.
Yeah.
And there was going to be a shortage of gas and the refineries hadn't been making as much gas because they've been,
People are at home, not
need it.
commuting and whatnot. Yeah.
So there was an imbalance of gas, and what ended up happening was the prices in California, they're up to $5 a gallon almost.
I
And
paid
so-
over $5 a gallon.
You did? Mm-hmm. I mean, that breaks my heart.
Premium, but
that
yeah.
breaks my heart. But it's if the prices go up, then fewer people. Well, maybe we'll make that trip next year when it's $3.
Yeah.
That's what happens. So it's people just self-select, and the problem solves itself.
Yeah.
So that's
What if the Fed just prints too much money?
Yeah, talk about that. That whole idea. Where they're people have the idea it's like a printing press. They're just printing all money out of thin air.
Yeah, I had a client. Like, is there a printing? Like, are actual dollar bills getting put out? And I think there is this idea that it's printed and then like dropped from a hot air balloon on society or something. Right.
That's how we do it.
It doesn't exactly work like that. It's more like the Fed is loaning money out to banks, and it's purchasing T-bills from the government. So it's infusing money by giving the government money by purchasing the T-bills, but there's no actual like dollar bills just floating around out there, and there's a debt associated with that.
Right. Yeah, so there's a
they can't just
debit
print
and
until
credit.
the cows come home like nothing's happening.
If the government just gives money away like for $600 a month or PPP or whatever, $600 a week for unemployment, there's a corresponding debt on that they have to pay back at some point.
Yeah.
So it's not just printing. That would be inflationary.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, and it could cause hyperinflation, which is what everybody is. That's what's on all of the news headlines right now, and it's very sensational.
Yep.
You can get some great images of bread lines. And
Are we going to have hyperinflation?
Oh my gosh!
Yeah, here in the country.
Okay, so here in the United States, we define hyperinflation as inflation of 10% or more. Worldwide, it's like we have zero tolerance for inflation. Clearly, here worldwide, it's more like 1,000% but still, a 10% would be painful for us here in the United States.
Right. And so if you think about Venezuela right now, their inflation rate is 2,300%.
Yeah,
which sounds awful, and it is awful. I mean, the experience on the ground is terrible. But some of the worst inflation ever was, and again, you get into my age bracket, we were taught in school about the pre-World War II Germany and the Weimar Republic, and they had Reichmarks that were, in 5 years, the price of a loaf of bread went from a quarter of a Reichmark to 80, I'm not kidding, this is not a typo, 80 billion Reichmarks to get a loaf of bread in 5 years. That's incredible inflation. Can you imagine? The currency was so worthless that it was worth more as kindling for fires than it was for money. Are you serious? I'm dead serious.
That's absurd.
That's right. Yeah.
That is totally absurd.
Yeah. So that's getting inflation out, out of hand.
So like, is this where we're headed here in the U.S.?
Well, no, absolutely not. There's no rational expectation anywhere for any kind of inflation at that level. We do have situational inflation because of COVID, which we've explained. Imbalances, basically, between supply and demand that drives prices up.
Yeah.
But
what is it that you know that everybody listening doesn't know? Like, how can you be so confident in that?
Oh, okay. So what you want to do is follow the bond markets.
The bond
so the like you didn't know.
Bond. No.
But the secret is the bond market. But the 10-year Treasury right now is yielding 1.3%.
Okay.
So that means that there's people buying there's trillions of dollars in treasuries that are held out there. So investors.
Let's define. So a 10-year Treasury means you're not getting your principal back for 10 years.
Right. And in the meantime, you get a level of interest guaranteed by the government, by the U.S. government. So people are saying, well, I'll take that trade. I will earn 1.3%, and I think I'm going to get a reasonable return. So that means implicit in that they're not expecting to have hyperinflation. If you thought inflation was going to be 5, 6, 7%, 10%, you would never in a million years accept 1.3% yield.
Yeah.
These investors who are not talking heads, talk is cheap. These talking heads, whatever, you can have Jim Cramer or whoever.
Here we are being the talking heads.
Yeah, right. But
hey, Pot.
You can listen to us. But a lot of the talking heads that are preaching gloom and doom and all these horrible things, they don't have skin in the game like the bond market investors do.
Yeah.
And the 30-year Treasury, that's even a longer example of what people are thinking. That's yielding 1.9%.
Yeah.
Let's call it 2. So that means that you're investing money for 30 years. You don't want to put it in for 30 years and think, I'm not going to get it back and I'm going to lose money big time for the next 30 years.
Because I think we should define, and I see a question that's speaking to this a little bit, is like interest rates and inflation are correlated.
Right.
Right?
Yeah,
so,
of course. They are tied together.
Yeah. So not everybody understands that relationship there. Right? So as inflation is increasing, the Fed will increase interest rates. They don't increase on their own. The Fed sets our interest rate.
Yeah.
For
the short-term rate.
The short-term rate.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
There's some supply and demand that happens
overnight
with
rate.
other rates.
Right.
Yeah.
The rate that banks charge each other to loan money overnight to keep their balance sheets good.
Yeah.
The Fed does set that. And it was 18% in what was the year? 1981? 80 or something?
Now you're testing us.
But lately it's been 1/4%. So you can see the big range, right?
Yeah.
So the Fed controls that. That's one of their tools they use to manage the economy and the inflation rate. They have a lot of tools they have a lot of arrows in their quiver that they use, and they have done a phenomenal job.
They have. Yeah. I mean, it's pretty clear that even though we're seeing it's about 5% inflation today.
Right now, month by month, right?
Yeah. That it is situational, and the Fed is using their tools because they've kept interest rates so low for us. They're continuing to pump money into the economy. We still need it, clearly, as the pandemic is off and on or wherever we are.
Right. Yeah, and the Fed is looking beyond the 5% thing. If they were thinking, "Oh my gosh, it's 5% now, we gotta stop this," because their band is like 2. So they're looking at it like it's situational. And everybody's like, "Hey, Fed, you're not being aggressive enough." And then it's possible that's true, but I don't think so. I think the Fed knows what they're doing.
Well, I think we had a pretty good opportunity for a run up in inflation in the late 90s. You have a ton of money infused into our economy all of a sudden with the technological revolution happening.
Yep.
All of the dot-com millionaires. The federal policy at that time, I think, saved us from inflation. We were primed for it, and the policies were in place. Yep. And for 40 years, they've managed this to 2 to 3%.
Yeah,
it's been
they've
phenomenal.
done it. They know what they're doing. I think they've learned that we have these tools. Like it's like instead of waiting for a hurricane to show up, we have satellites now. We can see what's happening. We have a early warning system, right?
Yeah.
But in the 40s, they didn't know that was the thing just showed up and killed a bunch of people.
Yeah.
So we have tools now, technology that helps us to manage the economy and manage inflation and keep it within a band.
Yeah.
So the Fed's not worried about systemic inflation.
Right.
They're starting to get a little but I think it's because they think the economy is heating up a little too much, not because, gasoline is really high right now or, chips are high.
And it stands to reason that our economy would heat up after it cooled all the way off with COVID.
Exactly.
I mean, this is all exactly what you would expect to see happening going forward.
It's a mirror image of what we saw. Right.
And it's not just Fed policy that's keeping inflation at bay. There are other factors too.
Right.
Like you have the internet. How does the internet keep inflation at bay?
The internet has really been something. It's sort of like the latest version of the Industrial Revolution. So we had the agrarian economy in the 1800s, and then we had all this steam and gasoline engine stuff where they could do farming, and all the machinery and the factories and everything. It changed the economy completely, made us way more productive, and the internet has done the exact same thing. We can do just imagine. But for example, just in our own company. 20 years ago, we had 7 or 8 people working in the firm to do what 3 people can or 4 people can do now.
That's true.
And it's just because of
so much
productivity,
more efficient.
right?
Technology.
And you again, this is the downside, the seamy underbelly of it, that you can ship jobs overseas and do them for cheaper.
Yeah.
So as long as that is in play, then it's going to keep a lid on wages.
Yeah.
But we're seeing wages spike because there's no workers. You can't ship a job to India if you're going to be, a fast food job.
Yeah,
in McDonald's. The Indians can't do that.
Right.
So those jobs are going up in value.
Yeah.
You were going to talk about
the
accountants, right?
Well, yeah, I think
As
accountants are a good example of this because, and even us to some, financial advisors and investment portfolio managers to an extent, there are people who are in countries with low cost of living but good education. India is a good example of this. We always talk about poor India. You've got a highly educated population that has a low cost of living and are willing to do these jobs. And something like preparing a tax return, I don't need to sit across from you to do that.
Right.
And so because there are, if we got too expensive, all of a sudden people would start looking around and say, okay, where can I get this cheap? I don't want to pay that rate.
Right.
And so it's keeping our rates low because we know that you could run off and get someone else to manage your portfolio in another country.
Right.
And this is happening in a lot of industries here.
And that keeps a lid on inflation.
Keeping wages down keeps the lid on inflation because we don't have the money to spend.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Again, it's just supply and demand.
Yeah.
Okay, so you want to pay attention to bonds. We talked about Fed policy.
Yeah. So overall, we think the inflation, the opportunity for hyperinflation, it's not as ripe as the media would have you believing.
Right. That's
It's pretty muted once we get all of the sectors of the economy up and running again. So I think we will see little spikes as we get access to things we didn't have before, things play out. But inflation is always a thing, right, that investors have to be paying attention to because while we're saying it's natural and healthy for the economy, it also erodes the purchasing power of your money. So if you stick your money under your mattress, you're losing 2 to 3% per year. We thought we called together a list of 8 assets that you can invest in that will protect you from inflation.
Right.
Okay, so the first one I'm going to let you say because it's your favorite.
Owning real estate.
Real estate.
What a surprise. You think I'm big on that. And the reason is because you can raise your rents to offset inflation.
Yeah.
And the value of the home because it has a lot of commodities in the home and land and there's timber, there's wood, there's concrete, there's all these different things. Because those all go up in value, that makes the house go up in value also. So it's a good inflation hedge over time.
Yes,
and as you've seen, $10,000 houses in the 50s to $1 million plus, that's a good inflation hedge.
Definitely.
Yep.
Okay, number 2 is commodities. Commodities are physical items with inherent value. So think about grains, sugar, copper and other metals, coffee, natural gas, lumber. There's a whole market for those things. Now, individual investors are not going to go out and buy a bushel of grain, but you can invest in commodities through mutual funds and exchange traded funds. And it's a great hedge against inflation.
Yeah, it has been historically for sure. Gold and precious metals is the next one.
Gold.
They typically have been seen as an inflation hedge because if the dollar goes down in value and purchasing power, then the gold will keep that value.
Yeah. I'm going to put an asterisk next to this
Yeah.
one because gold and silver are very hot right now. Everybody, you thought you're so brilliant. You heard inflation was coming, so you ran to gold. Is what you're supposed to do, except it already happened. So if you're listening to this now, the prices of gold and silver have spiked tremendously. And you might not get any gains there as of now.
Right.
If you're already there, great. You've got a little bit of a hedge.
And there's also, how do you own it?
Yeah, so you could buy
Physically.
actual gold bars,
Oh, man.
which presents some risk in terms like theft risk, liquidity risk. If they're under your mattress, you have to turn that into money somehow.
Yeah.
And then, so you could own it through, there's all these outfits online where you can buy partials or whatever. There's also Vaulted, which I'm not recommending. I've never used it, but I am telling you it exists.
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, when you own it physically like that, there's always going to be the intermediary that's going to get his vig on the thing. So you don't know how much vig they're going to get from you when you want to buy it or sell it.
Suddenly
So
in the
there's
exchange, there's some sort of spread on it of 3%.
And in return for that, as an opposition for that, you could buy an exchange traded fund for free that tracks the value of gold every day, or silver or whatever you want. Yeah, yeah.
Good point.
Yeah. So I mean, I like. If that's what you want to do. We have a little bit of gold and precious metals in our portfolios as a hedge.
Yeah.
But we do them in the forms of ETFs, exchange traded funds for sure. Yeah.
Okay, so this is an interesting one, but it's proven to be true. Investment grade art. So I'm talking about like Picasso's and the Mona Lisa, not your neighbor's beautiful painting, which I'm sure is amazing. But art.
The one your wife did, yeah, okay,
it's fabulous. Art doesn't lose value in inflationary periods, and so most of us are not going to go out and buy a Picasso. If you're interested in investing in art, Masterworks allows you to buy timeshares of pieces of art. You don't get the art in your home, obviously. That's dangerous, but you can own a portion of art if you want.
Right. But that again, it's a very illiquid market, and you have to have a lot of expertise. Someone could tell you something. Oh, this is a Masterworks, Vermeer or something. You wouldn't know.
Yeah.
So you could get your clock cleaned really easily with that.
Great.
Yeah. And the intermediaries too. You have to remember those guys. TIPS, Treasury Inflation Protected Securities. Yeah. Those are issued by the U.S. government, and they basically give you a return of which is usually very low. Right now it's 0 plus whatever inflation is. So if inflation is 10%, you're going to make 10% on these treasury bonds that are adjusted for inflation.
They're government-backed bonds.
They're government guaranteed, and they mature in somewhere up to many years, and they can protect you. They provide a hedge against inflation. Yep, with no risk.
Number 6, growth stocks. This probably should have been number 1. The inflation is the whole reason we bother investing in stocks in the first place. Like, it's fun, but it's, we do it for inflation. So growth stocks. When, think about it. If people are out buying stuff and corporations are making a whole bunch of money, stock prices are going up. So it's that's how you hedge against inflation. It's one of the easiest ways to do it, and most accessible. And
what keeps stock prices, in the game is the fact that they can charge more for their products and services as inflation goes up. That's the benefit, and the dividends will typically go up. So that supports the valuation of stocks for in an economy. Crypto.
Number 7.
You're gonna go with crypto.
I have to include cryptocurrency here. So I'm talking about things like Bitcoin. So currency is traditionally a hedge against inflation. Bitcoin is a currency, technically. Theoretically, it's a currency. So it stands to reason, in theory, that cryptocurrency would be a hedge against inflation. Now, the caveat here is that we haven't seen this play out yet. So we really don't know what will happen. I hope not. I don't want to learn how hyperinflation impacts cryptocurrency, but it's in theory, it would be a hedge, which is why it's on this list.
Yeah, it's kind of the new gold in precious metals. That's what some people think.
Yeah.
I don't happen to, subscribe to that. I think the jury's way out. We have a long time to see what happens with that.
Great.
Converting debt so not debt that you owe, but if you're a lender, converting the debt that you have that's fixed rate, like 3%, you're loaning it to people, to variable rates. So in other words, you're going to charge an interest rate that's tied to an index like inflation or the the cost of funds or the LIBOR or something like that.
Right.
That way you can get a higher rate of return if inflation comes back.
Yes.
You don't want to be borrowing under those terms.
No
you
way.
like borrowing at a fixed rate of 3% on your mortgage. Anybody that's got a 4, 5, 6% mortgage, please refinance that right now at these low rates, because you never know what's going to happen.
And if you happen to be in any kind of variable rate loan, see if you can fix it today, right now.
Yep.
Don't wait any longer.
For sure. Absolutely. Absolutely.
And by the way, if you're a DMG client and you're listening to this, you already own 6 of the 8 things in your investment portfolio that we mentioned here.
Right.
And like I said, you have to be in these things prior to the inflation happening. Once it starts happening, everybody knows this. And in fact, this list is going to be on the internet in our Know Your Possibilities guide, which we'll post along with the show. So like everyone knows this and they're all going to run there when it happens. So you need to position yourself today for future inflation. Don't wait.
For sure. Yeah, and we might even have more than 6, Mike, because we do have variable rate mortgage loans and stuff inside of our bond portfolios.
Yeah.
All right, so that's a lot about inflation, more than you ever wanted to know. Do we have any questions from the audience?
Yep, we have a couple of questions. Okay, so are gas spikes situational, or are those systemics, the gasoline that we're seeing?
Okay,
we talk about it going from 50 cents to $5.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because I would mostly think it was situational because of the everybody wanting to travel at the same time, but also it could be systemic because the government is really trying to encourage people to get off the gasoline and oil. So they're trying to put the squeeze play on and force people into going into battery, electric cars and e-vehicles and things like that. So that's something that could become more systemic as they put the squeeze on. But I think it would flip at some point when more people are actually have electric cars. Then they'll be like, hey, wait a minute, we want to keep the refineries going, so we're going to lower the price, right? So that could go the other way.
That's a really interesting way. It's a little bit of both.
Yeah, could be, right.
Cool. Okay, what's VIG? Someone says, what's VIG?
Oh, VIG. It's
for us young people who don't use that word.
It's the grease between. It's vigorish is what it's a. You got to be Italian to know that, I guess. You got to be like the Godfather era kind of thing. But it's like you want me to do something for you, I got to get a little something for that. So yeah.
Thank you.
That's what VIG is. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I'm reading the question. Sorry. It's time for reading glasses for me. I hit 40. Here we go. Are the government policies sustainable, or are they going to cause hyperinflation? Yeah. So the government has been pumping tons of money into society, as we talked about. How long can we do this before we have a problem? What do you think?
That's a really good question. And, I don't have the answer, but it'll be like a canary in the mine shaft kind of a situation. So you'll start seeing the bond interest rates go up. If we start, for example, if we're borrowing $4 trillion a year, sorry, I'm dating myself, $4 trillion a year more than what we're taking in, and we're doing that year after year after year, and the debt goes from 30 trillion to 40 trillion to 50 trillion. You would start seeing the government bond market just start showing signs of like, ooh, we're not sure these people can actually pay us back ever. Kind of what happened to Greece and some of these other places in Europe a few years ago. And so I think, we're not near that yet, because the market is, we borrowed more than we've ever in the last 10 years. And I think we more than doubled our debt, maybe tripled it. And the bond market is at the lowest rates we've ever seen. So I think people have faith that we have more capacity than we probably give ourselves credit for for borrowing. And so I think, I think long term, any household cannot borrow forever, right?
No.
But honestly, the government, if they let inflation kind of eats away, if you pay back in the future at discounted dollars or deflated dollars. You can do that for a long time. That's what they did in World War II, believe it or not. We borrowed a bunch of money to fund the war, and then we paid it back with inflated dollars. So it was a lot easier to pay back.
For us.
Yeah.
I think it's also important to note that we often will wake up in the morning and the stock market's crashing. It's not like that with inflation.
Often, sometimes.
Okay, 5 times in the last 30 years. In fact, we went and looked it up. So that it happens quickly. It's not like that with inflation. You don't fall off a cliff one morning. There are signs, and it goes kind of slowly. It's you were talking about in post-war Germany. It happened over a 5-year period. It wasn't overnight. And I think people would do well to remember that.
I think that if we end up getting into a situation where bond rates are starting to go up, that we would respond. I think it's said about Americans that we We are terrible dealing with the termites in the basement, but we're great when the wolf is at the door.
That's true.
And so I think it's going to have to become a wolf at the door situation where we actually respond to it. Kind of like what they're doing with climate change. At some point, we all.
I mean, the national debt has been a topic of conversation for a long time. This is not new. I remember sitting at a conference, a Charles Schwab conference, probably 8 years ago, and there's this bipartisan organization called Fix the Debt. They're great. You can look them up. They have been concerned about this for a very long time, and they have been, the termites and slowly looking at those, while the rest of us are like, "You're annoying. Be quiet. We don't want to talk about government debt." But they're looking at this, and there are plans in place. And again, Fed policy will come into play as this starts to happen.
Yeah. Hopefully, we'll start at least getting to a balanced budget. That would be nice, as a starting point. But again, the basic message I want to pass on is we've got a lot of capacity to continue to do what we're doing. And there's, at least at this point, there's not a lot of pressure to reverse that. And it's not causing inflation yet. And so there's not really a disaster looming, soon around the corner next year. There's just not. Yeah. 20 years, maybe. But hopefully we'll be more responsible.
Yeah. We have more questions? Should we keep going? We have a little bit.
Let's see how much time.
A little bit of time.
40, maybe one more question.
Okay, one more question. With the cost of homes, lumber, manufacturing so high, is it smarter to wait to purchase real estate than to buy when the market is at a high? What are the benefits to purchasing now? Good question.
Yeah.
Tricky question.
What do you think?
We don't have an easy answer.
Yeah.
I don't think. It's hard.
Yeah.
I will put one dash in the pro real estate column right now, and that is with interest rates so low. I mean, you can borrow for next to nothing. And so when you think about over a 30-year mortgage, the difference on your overall capital expenditure when you purchase that real estate is much lower. Even if you're paying, 30 grand more for the house, I mean, a couple of percentage points over a 30-year mortgage is a huge difference. So there's 1 point in the pro real estate column.
Right.
What do you have in the con?
I'll give you another point pro real estate.
Okay.
I think.
Oh, we were going to always answer this question pro.
Well, I think the only way you can do this and have your sanity is to be looking long term. You have to, if you're going to buy a house right now, you have to be able to believe that in 10 years, 15 years is going to be more expensive to own. Because what happens in the next year, 2 years, we could easily have. I'm not predicting a crash; those are very rare. But a softening where the market goes down 10% and people are more picky and they're not racing to buy your house and give you more money and stuff. Sure, that could happen. And it probably will happen. But if you wait for that, the market might go up another 30% before it goes down 10, and so you're missing out. And like you said, you miss out on the lower interest rates. So if you're going to buy right now, the only way it makes sense is if you think I'm going to be here for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, and I'll make money over the long run. And that way you can sleep at night and be okay with it.
I wouldn't try to flip a house right now.
No, flipping.
Both from the standpoint of how expensive they are, and we don't know which. It seems to be slowing down a little bit here in the Bay Area, but then you also have the expense of the repairs.
Right.
So I wouldn't be.
But feel like you're a failure because you didn't catch the market at the peak. That's a mistake. Don't go there. Don't put that on yourself because there's no way anybody could know. I don't know what's going to happen in the next 5 minutes, in the next year. I mean, we've all been waiting for a long time for the market to get a little soft, and all it does is get stronger. So who knows how long it'll go like that? I don't think it's knowable. And people say it's a bubble. I don't know that it's a bubble. I mean, it doesn't feel like a bubble. It just feels like it's been going up a lot because of supply and demand. So, okay. We have a little housekeeping to do at the end of this show now, right?
Yeah. So we have a new ebook out. It's called Evidence-Based Investing Insights. If you want to learn more about the science behind the way that we manage investment portfolios here, that's a great primer. It is written to be plain English and for everybody. So I hope that's enjoyable. If you're going to be listening to this, there's a Know Your Possibilities guide where if you want to take some notes, it would be a good place to start.
Yep. For future podcast listeners. And we do appreciate all of you that are watching live. It really means a lot to us. It's a great opportunity because you can actually submit questions live.
Yeah, it's fun. I see all your little laughter and loves and things.
That's great. So great. Yep.
And then if you want to talk to us at any point, you can go to our website. You could call. You could email. On our website, there's also a tool where you could just schedule a meeting with us. Please take it.
Right on our website. It's down by the podcast. Right. So we thank you so much for listening. and watching, and we appreciate it. And just remember,
no, we'll be back. We'll be here every 2 weeks in your face. You cannot escape us anymore. So 9/16 at noon, grab your lunch. We will be here in all the live 16th. Places.
Right. Oh, and if you have topics you want us to talk about, please submit them to us. Let us know. Give us a call. We love this one. Was actually submitted by a really good friend of ours and a client of ours who wanted us to take a deep dive into inflation.
I hope we went deep enough for you.
Yeah, I hope it wasn't too shallow in the shallow end. But we're not. Again, we weren't trying to make you into economists. Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
So thanks for joining us. Remember, you're invested,
and so are we. Take care.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.